In less than a single human lifetime, tracts of rural farmland were swallowed by concrete and steel, replaced by soaring skylines. To understand the velocity of this shift, we have to look back to 1949. Following the Communist Party's victory, Mao Zedong initiated sweeping land reforms, reorganizing agriculture under strict state control. For decades, daily life for the vast majority of the population was defined by modest, low-income realities and agrarian labor. The trajectory shifted in 1978. The state opened its economy to foreign investment, directing national resources towards export manufacturing and heavy infrastructure. This chart shows the resulting economic boom. Following that opening, GDP maintained an average growth rate of 9% a year for decades. This steep upward curve correlates directly with nearly 800 million people moving out of extreme poverty. By 2020, the government officially declared that extreme poverty had been entirely eradicated. The resulting wealth financed the modern, highly urbanized superpower we see today. The state-led, investment-heavy strategy produced immense growth, but relying on brute force capital injection and infrastructure spending to drive an economy eventually generates severe structural imbalances. Today, those state resources are funneled into next-generation manufacturing. The country is dominating global supply chains for electric vehicles and expanding heavily into autonomous robotaxis. To maintain this hardware edge, the government is aggressively recruiting global AI talent, successfully drawing Nobel-winning chemists and researchers from Western institutions to lead its domestic laboratories. This map illustrates a critical dependency: pharmaceuticals. Essential ingredients for global medicines flow outward to the US and Europe. A similar bottleneck exists across the Taiwan Strait. The tech sector relies heavily on semiconductor manufacturing clustered just off the coast. The drive to become the factory of the future yielded deep global reliance. Yet this intense focus on export dominance and technological hardware obscured growing fractures at home. In recent months, severe typhoons have triggered destructive flooding and rare tornadoes, tearing through central provinces and key industrial zones. The strain on infrastructure is physical as well. A recent fire in a major eastern manufacturing hub killed at least 28 people, exposing the human risks in these densely packed industrial capitals. Behind the physical damage is a deep economic stall. Vast residential complexes sit unfinished. A protracted property sector downturn has suppressed domestic demand, introducing a heavy deflationary pressure to the broader economy. Economic anxiety is widening the gap between urban centers and rural villages. Frustrated by a slowing job market, younger demographics turn minor internet controversies into major outlets for economic venting. The government's response to this friction relies heavily on control. New sweeping legislation, such as the Ethnic Unity Law, grants authorities broader legal reach to monitor the population and pursue critics, even beyond its borders. This political crackdown carries severe consequences. Dissident figures who sell critical material or defy Beijing face intense pressure. Recently, Hong Kong bookseller Lam Wing-Ki passed away after years of state targeting. The exact mechanisms of rigid central planning and strict compliance that constructed the economic miracle are now stifling the organic domestic consumption required for the next phase of growth. Compounding the economic stall is an irreversible biological reality. The workforce is rapidly shrinking to support an increasingly aging population. Despite direct mandates from President Xi Jinping urging citizens to have more children, younger women are actively resisting the pressure to reproduce, citing the high cost of living and economic uncertainty. While the labor pool contracts at home, external pressure is intensifying. In the Indo-Pacific, military assets are increasingly clustered around the South China Sea as strategic competition with the US escalates. This regional tension filters down to minor agriculture. Even the import of local specialties, like Taiwan's custard apples, is being weaponized as leverage in cross-strait trade disputes. The state is caught in a dual squeeze, attempting to manage a collapsing demographic base internally while navigating an increasingly hostile, competitive environment abroad. This diagram outlines the International Monetary Fund's primary prescription. To survive, the economy requires a structural rebalancing, shifting weight away from state-driven investment and toward domestic consumption. Executing this economic pivot is complicated by binding environmental targets. The state committed to peak carbon emissions by 2030. Beyond that peak, it faces the monumental task of reaching total carbon neutrality by 2060, requiring a massive decarbonization effort without cratering national GDP stability. Adapting a rigid, heavily controlled system to meet these internal deficits and external pressures requires flexibility that state planning typically resists. As the data settles, the question remains whether this is simply a structural pause to reload for the next century, or if we are watching the peak of an economic giant. This chart tracks the scale of a generational transformation. In 4 decades, China's economy crossed the 140 trillion yuan threshold, while the poverty rate collapsed, lifting over 800 million people into the global middle class. That growth persists. In the first quarter of 2026, the economy expanded by 5%, reinforcing the country's role as a stabilizing force in a volatile global market. Yet, this domestic stability is paired with increasing external friction. Recent naval clashes with the Philippines have seen the China Coast Guard use high-pressure water cannons to intercept supply missions in contested waters. At the same time, American tech leaders are warning that the United States is losing its historic lead in advanced computing and semiconductor manufacturing. Chinese leadership views these events as a single, unified priority. To them, technology and growth are no longer just economic metrics. They are matters of state survival. China is engineering an impenetrable fortress designed to withstand a fracturing global order. To decouple from global vulnerabilities, Beijing is insulating its core economic engines. Oil now accounts for less than 20% of China's total energy consumption, with coal to chemicals and renewable sectors rapidly filling the gap. This energy structure limits the economy's exposure to international oil price swings and the threat of fuel shortages that can paralyze production. On the technological front, U.S. efforts like the CHIPS Act have attempted to curb China's advanced computing capabilities by restricting high-end supply chains. China countered by scaling its domestic manufacturing. By reaching near parity in global supercomputing and developing its own microchips, the state has built its own technological foundation. Controlling both energy and microchips ensures that the national economy can continue to run even if it is severed from global markets. True autonomy requires a secure perimeter and direct access to raw materials. This shift is most visible in the South China Sea, which holds an estimated 11 billion barrels of untapped oil. China is pushing its defensive line outward, moving deep into the exclusive economic zones of its neighbors to claim these resource-rich waters. They are turning submerged reefs into militarized artificial islands, equipped with runways and ports to permanentize their presence in the region. This strategy is used to choke off Philippine resupply missions at locations like the Second Thomas Shoal, where a grounded warship serves as an outpost. This militarized buffer zone serves as a physical moat, securing the energy deposits and shipping lanes essential to mainland survival. Physical security is only half the battle. Beijing views ideological fractures as a backdoor for foreign influence, making internal control an extension of national defense. The state manages this through a strict legal distinction between zongjiao, organized religion, and sisu, or cultural custom. Traditional customs like ancestor veneration or feng shui are actively tolerated because they stabilize society around Chinese cultural identity without creating competing centers of power. In contrast, organized religions like Christianity and Islam are subject to intense monitoring, as the state views any institution with global ties as a threat to domestic stability. Maintaining this ideological firewall ensures that internal dissent cannot be weaponized by outside powers. Artificial islands, supercomputers, and religious monitoring are all synchronized components of the same survival strategy. This has redefined China as a geopolitical asset class with a safety premium, a nation capable of absorbing global shocks that would destabilize others. We are no longer watching a series of random, aggressive headlines, but the deliberate construction of a closed system. In this new environment, global interdependence represents a dangerous exposure to foreign pressure. The world is fracturing into insulated spheres of influence, and China is ensuring its sphere is built to outlast the competition.